Hey everyone, thought I'd change up the setting again, plus I have okay-ish, it's probably a bit too overlit at the top, but whatever. So I just wanted to make a little video about the fact that I could finally go back to the Alamo Drafthouse here. I made a little video, my last video uploaded was guessing what the movies would be for the Dismembering the Alamo, and they're doing the 4 weeks thing. Nobody watched that video, don't worry about it. But but I finally get to go back to the local Alamo, and I thought I'd talk a little bit about what that was like, since that's obviously my favorite movie theater to go see movies here. It's my movie theater of choice, and it wasn't able to reopen in the state until about 2 weeks ago, 2 weekends ago, weekend before this one. And there was nothing I wanted to see that weekend, because I had already seen Tenet when I had gone out of state at the beginning of September. But this time, obviously, the surprise Dismembering the Alamo movie, got to go see that. So, it was fun. But it's a little different. So, I drive to the Alamo. Now, normally, pre-COVID, it would always be super difficult to find a parking space at this place. There's the parking lot proper, and there's a part that's a little bit to the left near this convenience store, and then there's a hill that's up there, and you can park up on the hill near this pharmacy. It's usually packed, especially on a Saturday night. It would normally be packed, but because North Carolina has this 30% capacity restriction, the Alamo here is only 11 screens, and most of the auditoriums there are pretty small. There's not a big multiplex auditorium there. I think the biggest auditorium might be, maybe 100 seats, maybe 150 seats, and the smaller ones are closer to 50, or maybe 90, I guess. But smaller auditoriums really. So when you cut that down to 30%, and then you want certain buffering between people, you can't really fit that many people in this theater at any given time. And, normally at this Alamo, because the theater capacity would be, or the seats you could sell were so small, almost everything would sell out. It was very rare that there would be a showing of a movie on a weekend that would not sell out at this Alamo, so you always had to buy your ticket at least a day in advance, if not further back. And back when they had season pass, which they'll bring back next year supposedly, you couldn't buy your tickets using your season pass until it was a week before that movie or closer. You couldn't buy it super in advance using the season pass. So normally, if a screening for the later part of the month went up weeks before, I'd be like, oh, I hope it doesn't sell out before I can use my thing. So that's kind of how that all went. So it was very odd when I get there and I see that the parking lot is pretty empty. There are some cars toward the front of the building, but the only time on a weekend night, because there's been weeknights where it's not as crowded, and I've gone to see special Tuesday or Wednesday movies when they do horror Tuesdays and weird Wednesdays and stuff like that. But on a weekend, haven't seen it this empty before. The last time I was able to go to this theater prior to COVID was Saturday, March 14th. And that's when, the news about COVID and things maybe shutting down and stuff started to really pick up steam. The movie theaters themselves closed the Monday thereafter, the 16th. So even then, with people starting to be afraid of this thing, that it still wasn't empty. In fact, the movie I went to see that night, Extraordinary, it was a sold-out show. Every seat was full at the time, and there was no buffering or anything done at that time yet. They weren't doing stuff like that. But it's still, the parking lot was pretty sparse that night. It was even more sparse now. I've never seen a Saturday night at Alamo look this empty. So you walk in, and the lobby is not like it normally is. So normally the lobby of this Alamo, there's a bar up against the back, and then there's tables where people can sit, and they can drink before or after a movie, or sometimes people just go there just to hang out and stuff. They have these tables that look like VHS tapes with a TV in the center. There's a video game thing you can play. On the far wall, there are VHS movies which can be rented. And then on the complete other side is where the merchandise and the DVD and Blu-ray rentals are. I took a picture of this and it came out really blurry because I didn't want to stand in the lobby for too long when no one was there and you're not supposed to be hanging out right now. So I took a picture of this, but the rentals in the center were covered with like a black tarp. And then normally there's like a shitload of merch on the side and then against the wall where they'll have like books and movies you can buy, stuff like that. And then the other wall they'd have like card games and board games and different types of t-shirts and hoodies and stuff. All of that was pretty much gone. Though with the t-shirts they did have them, but unlike like they'd have like the chest mannequins, I don't know what else to call them, and they'd be modeling the shirts and then they'd just have them, like the shirts in piles. This time, like the shirts were individually wrapped in like these plastic bags almost. But there was no one behind box, because right now if you want to go buy a ticket for Alamo, you have to get your ticket online or through the app. You can't buy a ticket, you can't just show up and buy a ticket in the lobby like a normal box office. Just like there was no bartender behind the bar, and in fact, most of the bottles of alcohol seemed to be gone. There seemed to be like a small thing there, but usually they had like a big board with all the different beers and chalk, and it would change, and all that was fucking taken down. So even if you wanted to buy one of the shirts that they did have available, and they didn't have... There were 2 shirts I was looking for from pre-COVID that I was hoping they'd still have for sale. I didn't see any of those, sadly, but even if I wanted to buy one then, don't know. And there was no... Sometimes, if you go to a special screening, like... Sure, I'm wearing right now, Real Film Day. That was a screening I went to pre-COVID. Normally, if there's a special shirt that comes out with the special screening, you'll have an opportunity to buy it through your app. There was no opportunity to buy it through that, because now, before, you would order food and drink when you sit down at your seat. There's like a little card, you write it down, that way you don't have to talk to the wait staff when the movie's playing. There's none of that. Now you have to buy your food and drink when you buy your ticket previously, and you can't, aside from like refills for fountain drinks and stuff, you can't change your order in the theater at all. In fact, the little order cards and the pen were taken away. They weren't at my seat when I went in there. So you basically just buy that, and they have a pretty limited menu. For this showing, I bought like a mineral water, Topo Chico, and just a basket of fries, just wanted to see. Because normally just buying regular non-loaded fries wasn't really an option on their menu. I used to buy the wings, but the wings weren't part of the limited menu, so I couldn't do that. So I just got some fries and a mineral water. So, yeah, there's no way to buy anything in the lobby anyway. So I get there. I usually get to the theater half an hour early because I really like Alamo's pre-shows. They always do like these cool curated stuff. But the lobby, again, the tarps on that, the shirts are wrapped up in plastic, no one behind box, no one at the bar, no one hanging out in the lobby whatsoever. It's a dead zone. The lights were brought down low, so it's like, it wasn't the normal level of lighting that lobby would have, it's the level of lighting you'd have if you got out of your 10 o'clock movie at midnight and they'd already shut down the house lights. So it was a very low light, like almost buzz. That theater is prone to power outages when it rains, and last night as I was driving to the theater, it was starting to rain pretty heavily, so I was like, oh, are they on like generator? Did they, because normally if there's a blackout and they have to cancel shows, you'll get an email, and I didn't get that, so I'm like, maybe it's that, but no, walked in there, they just had low lights. So I went directly to my auditorium. Now, when I originally bought this ticket, I talked about this a little bit in the last video, it was said it was for week 2, and I thought they were just skipping week 1. Later when I checked the app a couple days prior to this movie, it suddenly said week 1 instead of week 2. And then also, when I originally bought the ticket, it said what the theater number was. But then when I tried to pull up the ticket, the theater number wasn't there. So I'm like, well, there's no one to ask, right? So I had to pull up my old email from when I first bought it, because the ticket was on my app, and they also sent me a copy on my email. And I was like, okay, it was Theater 10. So I wonder if it's still Theater 10. Because if it's not, I don't know where to go. And so, and I had my seat in my row and everything. So I go ahead, walk to Theater 10, and I'm the first guest patron to arrive. So the house lights are still on, and the waitress was still putting like these things on the tables. So I knew where my seat was because they had a little thing at the table, and they just had this, which I'll show you. It's It's a little paper that's like welcome back with all of their various policies, and it had my full name there, what the movie was, and then what my concessions were. And then it's just the policies there. So there's a couple policies. Like it says, like you ordered your stuff in advance, which I knew. There's no plates or glasses. Everything is like in a bottle, or like if you buy a fountain drink, it's in like a plastic cup. It says you can do refills. Supposed to keep your mask on unless you're eating or drinking, which I abided by. I was nobody was in the front row, and I was in the second row, which is where I prefer to sit at an Alamo. Everyone else who was in the theater was behind me, so I couldn't tell if they followed this or not. And then there was a couple things they said before I came into the movie. One was that there'd be temperature checks. Nobody checked my temperature. They didn't do that. I just walked in and it was fine. The second was that people were going to make you leave row by row, and I wasn't sure how they were going to do that. Like, is it you start with the front and move back, or you start with the back as a closer and move front? I don't know. For this particular movie, I stayed for the entire credits, though. I didn't leave before the credits were over, because there's a closing credits song I really liked, and I wanted to listen to the whole thing. And by the time the credits ended, and I got up to leave, everybody else had already left, so I still don't know how that works. I still don't know if it's front to back or back to front. Does it make sense, or is it airport stuff or airplane style? I don't know. So aside from those two things, everything else seemed to follow the restrictions I was following. But yeah, so I go in the theater, I sit down, and aside from the ordering thing and everything, it's pretty much the same as I expect from Alamo. There's a pre-show. The pre-show for this was really cool. It was like old-timey theater interstitials. Like the opening establishing shot of House of a Thousand Corpses, where you're seeing Captain Spaulding's Museum of Monster and Madmen, and it pulls back and you hear audio, and the audio is like, see it, hear it, and actually feel it, ha ha ha. That audio comes from an interstitial that they played in the pre-movie thing for that half an hour there. So that was kind of cool to see, because I'd always heard that audio in House of a Thousand Corpses, but I'd never seen the little black and white theater interstitial that plays that. So that was cool. And it was fun, like black and white animated stuff, old-timey 1940s, 1950s type theater interstitials. And then it starts sort of proper. There were no movie trailers in front of this movie in the general sense, which makes sense since everything fucking pushed back anyway. But there was a little welcome back to the Alamo thing with their policies and all that stuff. And a couple of advertisements for movies Alamo is showing in October. And then the movie starts, and in the back of my mind I'm still like, okay, so is this really week 1 as my ticket says now? Or is this week 2 from when I bought the ticket? And as soon as the movie proper starts, and I see that it's like RLJ something, I always forget the name of the studio, but it's the studio that makes most of Shudder's originals, and then the Shudder logo comes up, so I'm like, okay, it's definitely not the European horror, because it wouldn't have those logos on it, so it's definitely a newer movie, which means it is week 1. And I was pretty sure that week 1 was going to be Psycho Goreman, and it was. The movie I watched was Psycho Goreman. Now, apparently this movie, its regular release is going to be in January. January is when it's going to hit select theaters for actual run. It's going to hit VOD and all that stuff. And then, since Shudder seems to have the rights to it, I assume it'll hit the Shudder service 2-3 months after its run. So, March, April, May of 2021. But I want to say that this movie is awesome. I had a lot of fun with this movie. It is, it's about these two kids, an older brother and a younger sister. The younger sister is more of the main character. She's also kind of a sociopath. They're playing a game, and it leads to them finding an intergalactic genocidal murderer buried in their backyard. But the sister can control it because she finds a gem. And so the movie cuts between like this genocidal murderer's backstory, which is like Masters of the Universe, Power Rangers kind of stuff. But the movie itself is very much like a very gory, R-rated kids movie almost, because there's no sex in the movie. The strongest profanity in the movie is the word frig. And the main characters are very much children. And if you took away the gore, this would very easily be a PG or a soft PG-13 movie of like a Garbage Pail Kids or Willow type of movie from like the 80s or like early 90s. Star Kid, that early 90s movie, has some similarities to this. So it's very much a kids movie in that way, except that it has a lot of really massive gore effects in it. And mostly practical. There is some CGI in the movie, but it's mostly practical gore effects with these really cool creature designs. And I want to say the movie does take place in the present time, despite the fact that no one has a cell phone and all of the TVs in the movie are tube TVs. But it does have a feel of a late 80s, early 90s movie. The only reason I know it takes place in modern day is because there's a joke involving the Iraq War in the movie, which is very funny, by the way. If it weren't for that, I wouldn't know that it took place in modern times. I would think this took place in like 1992 or something. But the tone of the movie is very similar to, if you've seen the movie Turbo Kid. Turbo Kid is like a throwback to like Apocalypse, like Mad Max type movies, but if it were like a kids movie almost. But that one had a very over the top, fantastical gore and had a very humorous tone to it, and so I would say this movie is very similar to that. It's definitely it's not even really a horror movie. It's just a extremely gory comedy, sci-fi comedy, but very gory, and it is insanely funny. Like even though I was worried about laughing at a movie in COVID even with a mask on, there were many times where I was just gut bust laughing out loud. This is a super fun movie, and there's very inventive creature designs. There's one creature that it's sort of a brain creature, and it looked like it kind of reminded me of like the Terrorvision alien. And there's a couple other like random type creatures. There's a lot of really cool designs. I'd say the main antagonist, who has like this whole white bodysuit and is from this race of like religious slave owners or something, that creature design is a little wonky because you can tell that some of the stuff is just very foam and not very rigid. But by and large, most of those creature designs, and there's a varied amount of them, are really cool and really fun to look at. And this is definitely a movie that really embraces like old school creature effects. Even though it does use some like CGI and stuff, like I mentioned, it's still a lower budgeted film. But man, the money that they spent on creature design, it is on screen, because these are really, really good designs. This is like you took like the best people from that Face Off reality show and you got them in here to create some of them are really wild. There's like a brain eye in a jar creature, and there's a really wide-eyed witch thing. There's a lot of really cool stuff in here. This is a very visually interesting film. The movie's just very goopy, I guess. But otherwise, it is super, super fun, and I highly recommend it when it has its regular release in January. If theaters are in a better position, you can see it then, or if you just rent it on VOD. It is a very, very fun movie, and I thoroughly had a great time. So as far as a movie to bring me back to the Alamo Drafthouse, my favorite theater, it was really fun. I really liked it. So Psycho Goreman. So then, I left the theater, and next Saturday I'll be back I bought a ticket for week 3, and my ticket still says week 3, but I'm kind of wondering if they'll do a switcher and make it week 2, because I know week 2 is supposed to be a Euro horror thing, and then week 3 I'm 99.9% sure is Nosferatu. Either way, I'm fine with either one. If I see a Euro horror movie, or if I see Nosferatu, which I haven't watched in a while, so it'd be still pretty fresh to me, I'm totally fine with that. But coming back to the Alamo Drafthouse again, which is my favorite movie theater, since COVID, I've been to one random theater in Virginia that's not part of a chain that I'm aware of, and then 2 very different Regals in South Carolina. All the Regals have now shut down, except for a handful in California they've kept open. Coming back to the Alamo, part of it is sad because it doesn't have the bustling energy it normally has, where you have a bunch of people in the lobby and you have a bunch of merchandise to look at. This is probably the least amount of money I've spent on any Alamo trip because I haven't had a pile of merch to leave with. There's none of that, and because of the capacity restrictions, not many people were in that theater watching that movie with me. If I had to guess, because I never looked behind me to guess, but there was only between 4 and 6 other people in that theater with me. Like, I know for a fact there was a couple in the row behind me. And I know for a fact there was a couple behind them. So there was at least 2 other couples in that theater, so that's 4 other people. But there may have been another scattering of 1 or 2. But otherwise, there were not many people in that theater at all. I was just kind of trying to judge from how many other people were laughing. And I know there was another. They did 2 showings that night. I went to the 8 o'clock, which apparently sold out because of the capacity restrictions, and then there was a 10:55 in a bigger auditorium. So I don't know how many people ended up seeing that one. But there wasn't many people in my screening at all, which was kind of sad. That's definitely the least populated weekend screening at an Alamo I've ever had. I've been at a couple emptier screenings on weekdays. I did have the theater to myself on a Wednesday afternoon for Alita Battle Angel once, and I saw that in like its 3rd week of release or something. And then a couple other times I've seen movies on like random weekdays when I had the chance. Hey, 2 things I forgot. Well, one thing I forgot, and then one thing that came out after I filmed that other part of the video. In the Welcome Back video that Alamo has, they show someone with a backpack, like a backpack with stuff in it in a thing, and they're like, yeah, we're sanitizing between every showing. And for some reason, part of me was like, do they really do that? And when I was leaving the theater and walking out to the lobby, I did see an employee with a mask on in the backpack ready to go into a theater and sanitize. So they are literally doing that. I did see that happen, so... Okay. Next. A comment on my last video left by a John Smith, I believe? Yeah, so John Smith, I assume not their real name. They're like, they think the 4th movie for the Dismember the Alamo, the one that's a advanced screening of a 2020 film, that's not a horror comedy, is going to be The Dark and the Wicked. I had not heard of this movie, so I looked it up, and the company releasing it is RLJE Films, which is the distributor behind Psycho Goreman, and is the distributor behind most of the movies that are like Shudder originals at this point, or Shudder exclusives. The one when Shudder picks up, it's that studio. I think Scare Package was also them. So I think that's actually a really good guess. I watched the trailer for it, and it doesn't really do anything for me. It's from the director of The Strangers. I absolutely despise the movie The Strangers. I think it is a lazy piece of shit. But I know that movie has a big fan base, and then there was a sequel. I did watch the sequel when it hit Amazon Prime. Found it to be mediocre and forgettable. But I really, really hate the first Strangers. I fucking despise that movie. I think I wrote a review of it a few years ago, back when I wrote full-length reviews, and I kind of stole a Roger Ebert line where I said it's the watching that movie is like watching a blank screen for an hour and a half, where you don't care about the characters, there's no tension, there's no nothing, the killers have no motive, and the movie tries to pass that off as it being clever when it's really just fucking lazy, and the movie just felt like the director's demo reel and not a real movie, and I fucking despise that movie. I hate The Strangers. So, the fact that The Dark and the Wicked is from the same director gives me a bit of pause. Again, I watched the trailer, it seems okay. It doesn't seem like my kind of horror movie, but it could be good. I mean, there's only so much you can get from a trailer. But I did see that he made a movie between those two. Between The Strangers, and then there was a very long gap where he didn't make a movie. So between The Strangers and this movie, he made another movie called The Monster, which, okay, very generic title. The Strangers, The Monster, you know. But I just watched the trailer for that, and that one actually looks pretty decent. It looks kind of like a parent and child trapped in a car with a danger outside, almost like the Cujo scenario. Apparently that's streaming on Netflix now, so maybe I'll give that a spin. But otherwise, yeah, so if that's what the movie is for week 4, then I don't mind that I'm missing that movie. But yeah, so that's just an update. But, nothing's set in stone. It could be something else, especially something from the canceled South by Southwest or Fantasia Fest or anything. Something that was probably in the festival lineups that were going on. I assume it's going to be a movie from that. But okay, so thanks, John Smith, for mentioning that, because I'm pretty sure that you're probably right there, especially if it matches the running time and with that studio releasing it. But yeah, that was all I wanted to add.